We saw in the previous video that you use the if statement when you want to do something if a condition is true, but don't need to do anything if the condition is false. Here's the temperature conversion program with the warnings. Just because it's not hot doesn't mean it's cold, so we do not use an else statement, and we need a second if statement that checks if it's cold. You use the if-else statement when you want to do one thing if the condition is true, and something else if the condition is false. In this example, depending on whether the discriminant was negative or not, affected which section of the code we wanted to execute. If we run this with 1, -6, 9, you'll see that it outputs the solutions are 3 and 3. That's a special case where there is a double root. It would be nice if our code indicates that. We could fix this by adding a nested if statement. When the discriminant is non-negative, we check whether it's 0 or positive. This will work, but we can see that if we had more options for the positive case, such as whether the discriminant was more than 10, we would need to continue nesting if statements. This makes the code more difficult to read, so when there are more than 2 options, there is a better way than nested if statements. This version shows the Python keyword elif. You use the elif statement when you want to check another condition after your initial if statement if the first condition was false. You must have an if statement before you can use the elif statement. The difference between 2 consecutive if statements, as we had in the original temperature warning program, is that both if statements were executed and their conditions checked. With the elif that follows an if statement, the elif condition is only checked if the condition for the if statement was false. In this case, we have 3 options. We want to execute different code depending on whether the discriminant is negative, 0, or positive. The if statement checks the negative condition. If it is false, Python skips to the elif statement. If that condition is true, it will execute the elif statements and skip the else statement. If the elif condition is false, it skips the elif statements and executes the else statements. If the if condition is true, it does not check the elif statement. So with a sequence of if, elif, and else statements, exactly one of its statements is executed. Let's debug this, and we'll use 3 different inputs to show each set of code. This also demonstrates an important concept when writing code with conditional statements. When you test the code, you need to check that each possible code execution path works properly. So to fully test the code, we need to test it with an input in which the discriminant is negative, an input in which the discriminant is 0, and an input in which it is positive. First, we'll use 1, 1, 1 and see that there are no real roots. Next, we'll use 1, -6, 9 and see the double root. And finally, we'll use 1, 1, -6 and see the 2 solutions 2 and -3. We could have also written the else statement as an elif statement. This would work, as if we get to that point, the discriminant must be positive. But that isn't good style and makes the code less clear, as it indicates there might be a situation in which none of the conditions are true. In this case, there are only 3 possible options, so we want to use the if, elif, else statements to indicate that. An example where that would be useful is the conversion program. If it's hot, it can't be cold, so there's no need to check if it is cold. This allows us to change the second if statement to an elif statement. If it's not hot, it might be cold, so we use the elif to check if it is cold. Note there is no need for an else statement because we're not going to print a warning for temperatures between 30 and 90. Also remember that you can't have an elif without an if statement. In this case, we do have the if statement on line 7, so the elif on line 9 is only checked if the condition on line 7 is false. You can have as many elif statements as you want to create a multiple selection statement in which exactly one section of code is selected for execution. With code such as this, the first condition that evaluates true has its statements executed, and none of the code for the other conditions is executed. In fact, none of the remaining elif conditions are checked once a condition that is true is found. If none of the conditions are true, only the code for the else statement is executed. If you leave off the else statement and none of the conditions are true, none of the code for any of the conditions would execute, as we saw with the final temperature conversion program just before this. To summarize the rules, you can have an if statement without an elif or else statement. You cannot have an elif statement without an if statement. In Python, you never write else if, you must use elif. Remember, the only character that comes after the else is the colon. You cannot have an else statement without an if statement. There is an exception to this last rule in Python, but it is not common in other languages. In Python, you can write else statements after a for loop, but we'll ignore that for now.